Henry, and we're back for another live event with Stigma-Free Society. Now, this is a special event this week, and we've been going all day since 10 a.m., and we're looking to support and get donations for Stigma-Free Society. It's been a really tough time right now with COVID-19, and our founder, Andrea Paquette, spoke earlier about how it's been difficult to get continuing donations to the foundation. So we're really looking for your support. And our goal is for each person to donate $20 or less, whatever you can. And we're hoping that 1,000 people can do that so that we can reach our goal of $20,000. So right above the video link here is where you can find the information of where to donate. And we're hoping that you can do that for us. Thanks so much for tuning in. So today I have here with me a teacher from my school, Andy. And Andy, I'm just hoping that you can tell us a bit about yourself and different grades that you've taught.
Yeah, so I've been a teacher in Surrey for about 11 years now. So I've been teaching at Hazel Grove. This is my third year there. I teach grade 5, 6 right now. I'll be teaching grade 6 next year. And that's kind of my favorite grade level, is teaching grade 6.
Nice. Why would you say that you really like to teach grade 6 in that age group? Is there anything in particular about that?
For me, with grade 6, I really like the curriculum. I like the social studies and the science in particular. There's some really cool stuff in grade 5 and grade 7, but the stuff in grade 6 in particular, the social studies looking at inequality and racism and sexism and things like that, getting into some of those big discussions with my class. I really enjoy talking about those topics.
That's great. And I've sat in your class before and listened to your lessons, and they're fabulous. I just love how much you talk about worldwide issues and just important conversations to be having right now. So thank you for doing that. And also just wondering, how do you incorporate social emotional learning in your classroom, or just mental health education and those sorts of things?
Yeah, so as far as social, emotional, and mental health, it's something that I'm still learning. Everyone's still learning, but it's something that I've been learning more and more about in the last couple of years. You and I collaborated last year on a lesson around Bell Let's Talk Day. That was a good opportunity then. So some of the lessons that I do are really targeted specifically to that. But it winds up more often than not sort of coming up organically, or really just being a part of sort of like cross-curricular connections. So I might be looking at, again, social studies and looking at sexism and racism, and we talk about, people that experience these things and how they might feel, how we might feel when we see these things happening, and also connecting some of those ideas to bullying and being a bystander, to other subject areas like career education, where we talk about our actions and how they have consequences, whether we intend those to be or not. Even just before we started this interview, I was talking about how I like to sort of cross my arms, and I've talked with my class about the body language and what that suggests and what people might interpret, what message that I'm sending, even if I don't intend to send that message.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I like what you said about empathy there and teaching kids empathy, because that's so important. And I walked into your lesson. You were watching Hidden Figures the other day in your class, and I thought that was really great too. And you were telling me you had a bit of discussion around that afterwards. Can you tell me a bit more about that and what students were saying?
Yeah, so the movie Hidden Figures, it's a fantastic movie. It ties really well into the grade 6 curriculum, because you've got space and Newton's 3 laws, and it's about these 3 Black women in the 1960s working for NASA, and they're in the midst of the space race against Russia. But of course, being Black women working for NASA, they're experiencing racism and sexism. And so it's great to talk about the film afterwards with the students and talk about, well, what evidence of racism did we see? What evidence of sexism did we see? And one of my students yesterday, she brought up, well, I watched this movie on Netflix. She said it was called American Son. And she said, I watched it with my sister and my mom. And then we got to the end of the film, and she's like, I felt really sad And
Mm-hmm.
we sort of continued that discussion, and we talked about how, sometimes we watch these films that deal with difficult issues, deal with things that might be hard to talk about or hard to watch. And at the end of these films, we might feel sad, we might feel uncomfortable, we might feel angry. And so we talked as a class about, how it's okay to sort of sit with these ideas and sit with these feelings. But we also talked as well about how, more often than not, maybe not more often than not, but some people in the midst of the movie, they go reaching for their cell phone if they're at home and start fiddling away with that. And, I asked the kids, like, okay, well, why do you think people are doing that? Like, why are maybe your family members reaching for that? And, some said, oh, well, maybe they're bored or they're getting distracted. And then another student said, well, I was watching A Dog's Purpose with some friends. And he said, a bunch of my friends throughout most of the movie were on their devices playing away. And he said, I was watching this movie and crying on the inside.
And that's an important thing to bring up because it's an unhealthy coping strategy that a lot of our youth are using right now. And I'm hearing that from parents as well, that they can't get their kids off the video games or off the devices. So just presenting it and having a discussion around that way, like you did, and putting it out there, I think is a really important discussion. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I think it's important to at least recognize that, maybe, and talk about, maybe I can't cope with these feelings or these ideas right now, but to recognize that when I reach for my device, when I reach for my phone, whatever it is, when I reach for that distraction, to note it and say, well, it's okay that I don't want to sit with this right now.
And that self-awareness.
To acknowledge that awareness that this is why I'm doing this. So I'm going to choose to do this. I'm going to continue with this, or maybe to recognize that and resist and say, you know what? I'm not going to reach for that device. I'm going to put it away and I'm going to try and sit with these feelings.
Yeah, that's great. That self-awareness. I agree. I'm thinking back too. Last year, I worked with a lot of your students in your class, and this year I've worked with a couple in your class. Is there anything that you do as a teacher to help students accommodate for like anxiety and that sort of thing in the classroom? Any flexibility you allow?
Yeah. So last year I had a group of boys in particular who were really high energy. They would get really easily distracted. And so a couple of times I sort of said to them, like, why don't you guys go outside and just go run a lap or go run 2 laps around the field, burn off some of that energy, and then you can focus again. And eventually it got to the point where I wasn't saying to them, why don't you go for a lap? They would come up to me. They would recognize in themselves that, like, I'm really full of energy. I got to go burn this off. And they'd come up to me at an appropriate time and say, hey, can we go for a lap? And they'd go out, they'd run a lap, and then they'd find that focus again.
Yeah, and I love that. And then just having that own awareness and that self-regulation skill of just getting outside and cooling off because they're too energetic, or even just for feelings of anger, going to a cold space like outside, taking some deep breaths and regathering ourselves and rejoining the class. That's just a great thing to model as an educator. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, and I've used, with my class a couple of times, we've used apps like Calm and Headspace.
Yeah, that's great too. And it's free for educators. So why not have that modeling in your class where you all do it together? And it's really beneficial in the morning or after lunch and whatnot to just really teach that deep breathing and that mindful moments. So yeah. Good point.
I've found for myself, like, in order to, it's great to say, okay, we'll get the students meditating and breathing and working on that awareness, but it's also then it's scheduling it into my own day. So it gives me an opportunity to practice it, because meditation's a habit that I'm trying to build, but I'm not doing a very good job of it. But all of a sudden, if I put it into my classroom, then it's an automatic that I'm doing as well. So everyone's benefiting from it.
Definitely. And when you say that, it makes me think back to when I was a kindergarten grade 1 teacher, and it was similar, but I would like the Calm app for intermediates for sure. But I would do kind of mindful coloring in the morning on Mondays. And after lunch, I would incorporate kind of like a quieter time, whether they could be looking at books or whatnot. It's good for the teacher. It's good for the students. It's just good for the whole class atmosphere. Yeah. So great point there for sure. Another question I had for you is, why do you think it's important to be so open and transparent with our youth around mental health, or even just those worldwide lessons? So what do you think about that?
I mean, as far as mental health goes, I mean, it's certainly something that, when I think about my own experience in elementary school or high school, it wasn't talked about.
Hmm.
It was ignored, or it didn't exist, or there was certainly that stigma around it. Whereas now as an adult, I see more and more of my friends, my family members, myself at times, feelings of anxiety and depression and things like that, and to help recognize that. And so for students to be able to talk about it, um, in whatever way it's integrated in the class, it gives them an opportunity then to normalize these things and to recognize that, okay, well, maybe I'm going to feel this way, or maybe one of my friends might be experiencing this, and then I can be more understanding, I can be more helpful.
And I love what you said there about normalizing. Like, adults have mental health, children have mental health, we all have mental health. As parents, we struggle with mental health too. So just that normalizing, that's a big thing that Stigma-Free Society tries to do as well. So thank you for pointing that out. Also, I was kind of wondering, from you as an educator, we're going to be designing some lessons that align with the new curriculum. And we kind of want to hear from you as an educator, what kind of stuff would you like to see in those lessons? Because we want it to be practical for educators and so that they actually use it. So what would you recommend?
I know for a lot of teachers, a lot feel really overwhelmed that, okay, well, I've got to now talk about mental health. I've got to talk about, in math, I have to talk about financial literacy,
Mhm.
and I need to integrate, indigenous ways of knowing and all of these things. And I know a lot of teachers, a lot of educators feel overwhelmed that it's okay, I've got to do this in addition to, and I have to add this on and add this on. So I think instead, looking at lessons that are embedded into the curriculum, lessons that are cross-curricular. So
Yeah.
when I was looking at Hidden Figures, and we wound up into this conversation, I know certainly next year, rather than this sort of conversation coming up organically, if it doesn't, I might steer the conversation that way. So I think for teachers and educators, the things that are embedded into other curricular areas or cross-curricular, gives them an opportunity then to feel that, okay, this isn't something else that I have to add in. It's just something that I can draw a connection to through whatever activity. So it could be through, a physical health education component.
Yeah.
It could be through language arts and journaling. It could be through social studies and current events, or it could be through, career education and looking at um, how we interact with our community around us.
Absolutely. And I like that idea of cross-curricular. And one of our members as well, Lynsey G, wrote a blog post about how educators can incorporate the toolkit into their lessons and stuff as well. So she had some great tips there in how to make it a bit cross-curricular, but for the lessons in particular, you're right, that would be really helpful in incorporating, say, a language arts component, maybe writing about one of the inspiring stories on the Stigma-Free Toolkit website, maybe even creating their own story to post if their family's comfortable with that sort of thing, or as a presentation for the rest of the class. So I think that's fabulous. And they could even do a written component and a video component. So we're integrating different things there. So that's really helpful to us to know. And as well, for me as a school counselor, when I go into classrooms, I like to play short little videos and things like that to really grab and connect students. And I noticed that you do that a lot as well. If you could speak a bit to that, and if you would think that would be helpful for the lessons as well.
Yeah, I mean, a quick video is just an awesome way to get
Yes.
students engaged. It could be just a little 30-second clip to get them thinking about something, or it could be, a couple of minutes long. It
Mhm.
just adds a little bit more, because sometimes, we feel, if you're mindful of it, you get stuck realizing, okay, I've just been talking for 15 minutes to the students. So it's nice to have a mix of those visuals or music or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and I love that the other day when I came into your class and you were doing a lesson on Indigenous education, you played a music video to your class, and it had Can you speak to that and let us know about that?
Yeah, so we were sort of a part of the language arts curriculum, but some Indigenous connections as well, as we were looking at the story of Chani Wenjack in residential schools. And so my students, because I've only had a few that are coming back to school this month, but all of my students basically read an encyclopedia article from the Canadian Encyclopedia about Chani Wenjack and learned his story. And then for my students that were in the class, we looked through the Secret Path graphic novel by Gord Downie and Jeff Lemire. And then we also looked at a novella called Wenjack by Joseph Boyden. So we looked at his story in a few different ways. And then we also, as you mentioned, we watched a music video that took one of the songs that Gord Downie had written and then combined the art Jeff Lemire had created for the Secret Path graphic novel and sort of put it all together that way. And we talked a little bit further as a class yesterday morning, the students about, what did you like best, whether we were learning through the encyclopedia or the novella or the graphic novel or the music. And then certainly they were able to recognize that, some parts had different aspects that appealed to them in different ways. And then as well, we also talked about how, maybe looking at the graphic novel might work well for some primary grades or younger intermediate. Looking at the novella and the encyclopedia worked a little bit better as an upper intermediate class.
I just thought it was so engaging. When I walked in, I only actually had a few minutes because I'm moving around a lot as a counselor and going on bike rides with kids these days because why not? So I just thought it was really engaging walking into that. And so I stayed for like an hour listening to your lesson. So I thought it was fabulous. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Thanks.
Yeah. Do you feel comfortable sharing any of your personal experience in seeking mental health support or just different coping skills that you find helpful that you think that people would like to hear today?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of my students this year has definitely struggled with feeling, especially once we moved into the online model, she started feeling a lot of overwhelm because what I was doing, and I think what a lot of other teachers were doing, was basically Sunday night or Monday morning, here's all the work for the week. And for her, all of a sudden, it seemed very daunting to have all of this work at once. So I know she really, was really worried about that. And she felt so overwhelmed. And it wasn't until sort of talking through it and saying, well, okay, let's look at, there's say 5 assignments here. So you're just going to pick one. You're going to work on it on Monday. And then on Tuesday, you're going to pick one and you're going to work on that one. And just sort of breaking it up into chunks. And I had sort of learned about, the chunking method, or someone once called it the salami method to me. When I was in university, I really struggled with procrastination. Sort of, I don't know, maybe part of like a fear of failure, something like that. But procrastination, it got increasingly worse. Like when I started university in my first year, I'd have evenings where I'd be up until, 11, midnight. And then as I got into my second year, I'd have nights where I'd be up until 2 or 3 in the morning. And in my third year, all of a sudden, I still remember one morning where I worked on the paper until 7:30 in the morning, printed it out, and drove to school after pulling an all-nighter. I was in no shape to go learn. I was in no shape to drive. It was not good. And that one for me, that was sort of the tipping point where I realized, I got to do something about this. So I reached out I was at SFU at the time, and I reached out to the counseling services there, and they got me in touch with a counselor and went in for a couple of sessions, and we talked about procrastination and those strategies of chunking and the salami and how to sort of schedule myself to make it feel less overwhelming and how I could break it down. And over the course of the next couple of semesters, I started to do a bit better, where it was, I wasn't finishing assignments a week in advance. That would have been nice, but I was finishing assignments, the night before and going to bed and get a proper night's sleep.
Yeah, and sleep's so important for our mental health as well. And just thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing that with us, that feeling, that sense of overwhelm. And I think a lot of us are feeling that right now, just with COVID-19, like you say, and getting extra assignments or extra work for teachers. Like, teachers, props to you right now. You're teaching kids online and a few kids in person. Like, that's a lot. So thank you for everything that you do, and just any other kind of coping strategies or different self-regulation tips you have coming to mind. I know for myself as a teacher, I did a lot of the zones of regulation. So there were different like color emotions and whatnot. And at some days I would be like, hey, Ms. Henry's in the red zone here. So let's all just quiet down a bit and, you know, let's all self-regulate together. So is there any other tips that you would give to your students or other educators?
Yeah, you know, I think there's certainly, and especially as you mentioned, you know, during COVID-19, whether it's, you know, my workload or, you know, trying to exercise and build healthy habits at home, there's certainly been a lot of times where I've tried to remind myself, feel like, you know what, today I'm not having a great day. I'm not being maybe as successful as I want, but you know what, it's okay. I'm going to just do as best as I can today, and I've always got tomorrow. So, you know, maybe tomorrow will be a better day. Maybe it won't, and that's okay too. I'm going to do my best today, whatever my best looks like.
Yeah, and that just really goes to show to other educators and your students that we all struggle, and it's okay to struggle some days. So thank you for sharing that as well. Do you know the word stigma? So Stigma-Free Society, we really try to focus on just including everyone. So I'm just curious, what do you feel like stigma means to you as an educator?
When I think of, you know, a stigma generally being something that's not talked about, or something that is, you know, I might say being, you know, shoved under the rug.
Yeah.
It's not acknowledged. It's, oh, you know, we don't talk about that.
Yeah, I agree. And I know last year when we collaborated together and did the lesson, you brought that up to the students to see what the students would say stigma was to them. And a lot of them didn't know what it meant. So I think even just that conversation with kids around what does stigma mean to you, or what does mental health mean to you, or what's the difference between mental health and physical health, are also very important conversations. So I think we're pretty much going to wrap it up. So thank you so much for joining us. And I'm just going to remind everyone here that this is a charity event, and we really appreciate your support and are asking for $20 donations or less, whatever you can donate. And we're trying to reach our goal of $20,000. So that would just be $20 for 1,000 people. And we really appreciate all of you tuning in today to our talks. And I'll be back actually in a bit around 3 o'clock to talk a bit more about how educators and also parents and other counselors, how you can support using our toolkit at www.stigmafreetoolkit.com. So check it out. It's fabulous. And we're looking forward to adding more amazing resources for you. And once again, thank you, Andy, for being here. And everyone, take care. Thank you.
Have a good day.